slavery, bondage, servitude. All in the past, no one bought and sold, beaten and exploited. But 27 million people are slaves today, more than at the height of African slave trading, and half of them are children. It's an over $30 billion a year industry, growing faster than drug and illicit arms trading. But is there a public outcry? And are there present-day abolitionists, people willing to take up the cause of those held captive? Today, modern emancipators have answered that call. Heroes who have dedicated their lives to combating the evils of slavery in all parts of the world. In Thailand, the sex industry feeds on the problems created by rapid industrialization, population growth, immigration, war refugees, and poverty. However, Annie Dieselberg, with her innovative jewelry company, Nightlight Design, has chosen to confront the sex industry of Bangkok head-on.
Thailand is known around the world as a center of trafficking. It's source country, destination country, and transit country. And women from Thailand are literally, they are sent all over the world into the sex trade. A lot of them go from here to LA, a lot of them go to Germany, a lot of them go to places like Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong, all over the world. But Thailand is also, strangely, a place that brings in women from all over the world for the sex industry. And this area is one of the most international sex trade areas in Thailand. And on any given night, we can talk to women and children from as many as 14, 15 different countries in this area. 2 of the streetwalkers in the last 3 to 4 months have been murdered by their clients. And as one streetwalker said to us recently, I asked her, I said, are you afraid here on the street? Because 2 women from this street have been killed in the last few months. And she said, I want to die. If I die and I go to hell, it'll be better than this. Some women that we've talked to are locked up during the day and are forced out at night into prostitution. It's the underage women that are in the bar that the bar owners will have to be careful with in terms of giving to the customers, but they do give them. I mean, men can walk in and they can say they want an underage girl, and they will be able to produce one for them. Right before and right after, the customers come up and fondle them and proposition them, and you see the tears in their eyes, you see the emptiness, you see the longing, you see the distant look that's trying to escape the reality. But the truth is they don't want to go home because there's no money at home, because their families have been threatened, because they've come to believe that this is all that they can do to survive. I knew that something had to be done. I knew that there was injustice. I knew that the majority of these women did not want to do what they were doing, and given an opportunity, they would choose otherwise. And it's one thing to stand outside of a bar, to walk past it, and to see women dressed in seductive clothing, and to see them smile at a man walking by and say, hey, I love you, short time, and think that, you know, they're okay with what they're doing. But it's another thing to be sitting with them at the bar, and after they call out to a foreigner, they turn around and they have tears in their eyes, and they say, I never wanted to do this. I cried every night the first month that I was here, but I have to send money home, and I'd rather be doing anything else. We came together and decided that we would form a new organization called Nightlight, which would work work to reach women in prostitution and those who are trafficked or at risk of trafficking in the Nana-Sukhumvit area. And there was one young woman who was very noticeable. So I called her over to talk to her, and she was 22. She had her first child when she was 13. She had 2 children. She'd only had a 2nd grade education, and she'd been working only 4 days. She didn't want to work there. She didn't want to continue. And so there I was with a situation. And when you hear something like that, I mean, I don't know how you can walk away and not do something. And so I paid the bar fee, paid the 500 baht, and took her out of the bar, and that's the fee for one night. Well, we had nothing, really, but I had been practicing making jewelry and thought that would be a perfect job for women coming out of prostitution. So basically I said, all right, let's meet at McDonald's and order a Coke, and here's some jewelry supplies, here's the tools, here's how you twist to make the earring, here's how you thread to make a necklace, and practiced a few times, sent her home with some materials, and set up a time to meet her in a few days to see how she was doing. And within a couple weeks, we had our 2nd girl come. And the 2nd girl who came was one that I had known for 6 years already. And I had wanted her so much to come out of prostitution, and it had been a long struggle of seeing her become an alcoholic and a self-cutter and become very depressed. And she called me and said, I've had it, I'm quitting this, and I'm coming to work with you. So we had 2 women, and we started meeting in my home and making the jewelry in our home. And that's pretty much how it started. It took off from there. A few months later, we were hosted by an international church in the area for about 6 months, and a year ago in November, we moved into our present site with 8 women. Today we have almost 40 women. So we established Nightlight Design Company Limited as a registered Thai business company. And so the women come in Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and they make jewelry. And in the process of making jewelry, which is a job that gives them dignity, there's something therapeutic too about the colors and the touch of the stones and putting patterns together, and all of that I think is very therapeutic, as well as the community feeling. But aside from that, we offer English classes, spiritual formation classes to the women, other life skills training, whether it's cooking, parenting, budgeting, health issues. We work with the women for holistic transformation, to help them to be able to move forward in their life with something dignity. And it does make a difference. One young woman, the one who I had known for 6 years previously, when she started making the jewelry, she was so proud of what she was making. And she wanted a picture taken with everything that she made. And she said to me one day, you know, I used to always walk with my head down because I was so ashamed of who I was and what I did. But now I catch myself walking with my head high because I'm really proud of what I'm doing.
The Polaris Project was named after the North Star, which was the star that guided slaves along the Underground Railroad to the freedom of the North. Based in Washington, D.C., the Polaris Project has worked both to stop global slave trading and to influence changes in the laws here in the United States.
Started with two people, Derek Ellerman and I. We were seniors in college at Brown University that's when I first learned about human trafficking, and it was over a simple dinner conversation with friends. And over that dinner conversation, we were debating, how does a social justice movement take off? How does the world change? And the issue we were talking about was slavery in the past in the United States. As we were talking about this, it was Derek who first mentioned, well, what does that say about modern day slavery and human trafficking? And at first I was like, you must be kidding, what do you mean? I've never heard of this. Here we were in our senior year, a few months away from graduating at an Ivy League institution, and this was the first time I heard that slavery still existed. So next day I was like, I can't, maybe I'm just naive. And so I went around, asked my professors, asked my housemates, my other friends. No one heard about this thing that I just learned about. I went online and I was shocked by the statistics that human trafficking is the third largest criminal industry in the world, fastest growing, faster than arms, drugs, and the idea that in this modern world economy that there's this really dark underbelly where women and children and men are being sold for profit, I just couldn't believe it was happening around the world. So I pick up this latest newspaper article talking about 6 women from South Korea who were deceived about a job opportunity, brought to another country. When law enforcement found them, they realized that the women weren't ever allowed to leave unescorted. They had cigar burns on their arms, and what hit me most personally was that not only was this happening to women from South Korea where I was born, who were my age, but this was happening a few miles from where I lived. It was happening in my own backyard. And so the shock that slavery still exists in this world, but slavery exists in my own backyard, that's the thing that propelled Derek and I into taking action. When I first heard about the police raid, and I read it in the paper, like, this is slavery. The detective was even quoted as saying they lived under slave-like conditions. And given that this was an older article, but there was no sense of community outrage at the time. No one really picked up on the story. There weren't people mobilized around this issue. People didn't see it as a problem at the time. Our initial research uncovered a lot that surprised us. And first thing was that human trafficking is not only happening in other countries, but happening in our own country, in my city where I was living at the time, but also that traffickers aren't just victimizing foreign nationals and bringing them across borders, but trafficking in most countries, including here in the United States, victimizes its own citizens and residents. It's the internal trafficking that's the greater problem. When I first learned about that, I was shocked again, because it's one thing to hear about a mother in Cambodia living in a rural village having to make ends meet and selling her daughter to a neighbor or someone else who was offering a job. But when we first learned about American children being sold by their mothers, we had one client who was sold 2 days before her 14th birthday by her mother to a sex trafficker. It again reminded us that this world is very small, that traffickers, they don't discriminate according to age, ethnicity, culture, sometimes even gender. Traffickers are just looking to make profit off of human beings, and human beings are just commodities.
A recent Washington, D.C. Players Ball took place at the nightclub H2O. Sometimes endorsed by local mayors, advertised on local radio stations, and sponsored by world-famous rappers, these parties are given in cities all over the country and are gaining acceptance in the popular culture. This event was held to honor Pimp Juju's birthday. Their money, made by exploiting women and children, is given to pay tribute to the highest earning pimp of the year.
But we got a box, we got a golden box. It's a birthday celebration for the Pimp Juju, man, just showing some of the friends what he did to this community, did to this town. Really, you know, this town prepared for Juju liven it up, man. Niggas were selling narcotics, killing up each other, but they pimping. They pimping, man, so they playing some boss game tonight, so hit that box. Start off with $1,000 tonight. All players that represent Pimp Juju tonight won $1,000, and I'm gonna call you to the stage. Check.
And so it is happening here in the U.S. because traffickers are coming here to be part of this, the global trafficking market that's fueled partly by what's happening in the United States. Polaris Project has a very comprehensive approach to how we combat human trafficking, because we think that by taking a holistic approach we'll be the most effective. So part of our work is helping victims directly, addressing the question of how can we change individual lives today, and that's where our victim identification and social service work comes in. For every victim we're helping, there are hundreds of thousands out there we're not helping. So how can we work with partners to change laws at the federal level, at the state level, so that the systems are changing for the long term to protect future victims? And part of all of this we're recognizing is that it's not just our job to be doing this work. One of our approaches is to build a movement, empower as many people as possible so that more people are joining this fight. And our main program for that is our fellowship program, where we receive over 100 applications for each of our fellowship sessions, where people from across the country, around the world, apply to volunteer for us for 3 to 4 months to work at the front lines of the anti-trafficking movement. That's where they gain their knowledge, their skills, their expertise, and then what they do is they go back to their home communities and start up local offices and chapters and mobilizing their local community there based on everything that they experienced and bringing people together to strengthen those local community responses. Similar to our other chapters and offices in Seattle, Rhode Island, Boston, Los Angeles, Denver, New Jersey, all of those local efforts started up by community members who participated in our fellowship program, who volunteered with us, and brought together and unified others with a similar passion and just combined people's skills to the point where we have volunteer chapters training law enforcement, working with state legislators, introducing bills, passing bills, helping to identify victims of trafficking, working in schools to prevent this from happening to other people. And it's a very beautiful process when you understand what is happening at the grassroots level across the country. The best thing about working on this issue is that there is a role for everyone. Everyone has been given a certain light, whether it's experience or financial position or skills or knowledge. The anti-trafficking movement in the United States and globally, to be successful, needs everyone to do their part. And one of the things that we've seen here in the DC area is that the more people who come together weaving their areas of strength, the more powerful we become as a community. When the community doesn't respond or is silent, the victims aren't hearing any other sources of support, and we're only fueling and giving more power to the traffickers. And that is why it's so critical for every community member to be as involved and engaged as possible. And not everyone may be able to devote their full time to this issue, but everyone can do one small thing that just adds a little bit more to the fire and to the spotlight that we're putting on this issue so that we can be as effective as possible as a community.
Sanfoca is a peaceful fishing village that rests on the southern tip of Italy's heel, just 44 miles across the Adriatic Sea from Albania. It is an unfortunate part of the notorious Balkan Trail, where each year thousands of young girls are forcibly trafficked from Eastern Europe to brothels all over the world.
Questo è ancora bagnato, allora fai una cosa che si... No, per favore, portali in segreteria, perché questi...
Don Cesare Lo Deserto had founded Regina Pacis in Sanfoca in 1995, which was a shelter for refugees.
It is clear that throughout the years there has been a change in the type of women we get here. We started this activity initially with Albanian girls who were coming through this coast, especially since Albania is only 70 kilometers away from the Italian coast. And then at one point we started finding a lot of women from the Eastern Bloc, because they were being traded through the Eastern European countries, and then they were taken through the Balkans to Albania, then from there to Italy and then to Europe. Regina Pacis has become the one place where we can welcome these girls first, and incidentally, we have seen a lot of these traffickers being secured to justice. From the exterior, the structure may resemble a prison, but that's because of security. We are talking about protected shelter. You need to understand that these women are taken from criminals who have much interest in taking them back into the trade. These women must be defended in structures like this effectively by hiding them. The security has been arranged by local police who have established that there is a certain risk involved with my job. This is not a problem, really. You do it with serenity and you do it with great conviction. These women must be protected, they must be helped. For these women you must give your life. They must be hidden from the criminals. They have felt a long period of suffering, and hence to risk your life, especially for a priest, is almost like a duty. I have nothing to lose but life, and life is a gift of God. Today in Italy, the major part of the women that we shelter here are from the East. Why? Because they are beautiful women. They are also poor women that are taken to Italy, and we basically pick them up along the streets here in Italy. We're talking about women that come from Romania, Ukraine, Moldova, Russia, Kazakhstan, countries where people live with the hope of a better life, but in fact they end up being used and commercialized along the Italian streets. We then take them and enclose them in this structure, in this place, but then with the hope that they can then start walking on their own feet again, with a better hope for the future. How many girls we've helped here? It's quite a lot. How many girls were we able to hand back to their children, to their families? How can you forget all of these things? The story of these girls is a continuous story. It's a never-ending story. The story of one of these girls, I remember that at one point starts believing that her life can really change.
Dopo primi mesi mia madre mi ha mandato subito.
9 mesi. 1 anno e mezzo.
Dopo 1 anno e mezzo, vedi che sei arrivato. Regina
Grazie.
Pacis. Partite. Renata, tu sei...
I can never forget the time where I had seen this woman being able to hug her own son after years and years of prostitution. We've asked ourselves a very important question. Why should we wait for these women to become victims? Why wait for these women to become slaves in order to help them? We chose to go into countries where these women are from, and we find them in the schools and the families, and we talk to them. We talk to them about human trafficking. This has been our success in Moldova, Romania, and many other countries in Eastern Europe. This was our choice to go in at the source of the problem. We chose to go in the poor villages where there is not water, there is no food, where there is no heating, where the children of these women cry because they don't have anything. We chose to be next to them, to make them understand that the problem must be defeated there through the development. And in fact, we chose to open a few working activities to help these women to fight the poverty and especially to prevent them from losing their dignity and their beauty. This was our choice in Moldova. These choices are courageous, tough, and strong. They're done so that we don't have to call these women victims. Because, first of all, they are wonderful women that just need to be helped in their environment, in their family. I'm a man of hope. I am a man that does not accept defeat. I do not accept the suffering of other people. So I wish that all of the women of the world, especially those from the East for which I work so much, could enjoy a life with their husbands and not be exploited. It is clear that all of this right now, it's a dream. But for a man with faith, the dream is just a precursor for a miracle, and I believe in it. I believe in it because it's been years that I've been working in these countries, and I had to fight for all this to happen, and obviously I cannot do this on my own. You need the will of man. You need new policies. You need new and different developments. You need to be aware that when you work for poor people, you become a citizen of the world.
A 2003 Free the Slaves report named Florida as one of the top 4 states in the U.S. with a significant incidence of slavery. Prostitution, domestic, and agricultural work combine to account for 80% of how these slave laborers are exploited. Florida Coalition Against Human Trafficking was founded by Ana Rodriguez in Bonita Springs, Florida, and her work there has been recognized by the Department of Justice and the White House.
In 1999, I was a victim advocate in Immokalee, which is a very rural community in Collier County. And I was working domestic violence cases, rape cases, homicides, suicides. And one of my domestic violence cases was about a migrant lady that her husband had been arrested the night before for domestic violence. And when I went to do my follow-ups, because in Immokalee, and working with the migrant community, sending letters or waiting for them to respond, it's not going to happen. So what I developed was a home visitation program so that I would get the reports, and then I would go and do home visits and follow up the case with the victims or the witnesses. And one of the things that I did in this case was my normal visitation. I went to meet with the victim of the domestic violence, let her know about her rights. When I got to this apartment, I realized that there was a very young girl, probably 14, 15 years old. She was sitting by the window and she was still dressed with her native clothes. So as I'm talking to the wife of the perpetrator, I realized that there was something that was not right there, because the report, the domestic violence incident, was or took place because the wife got home from work and found the husband in bed with a young girl. So I took her outside, I started talking to her, and that's the first time I realized, or I heard the word slave, because she said that he would take me to work the fields during the day, and he treated me as a slave. I was his slave. When I made contact with the FBI, because I knew that she had come from Guatemala, when they came down to interview her, that's when I was told that I had just rescued a human trafficking victim. That was my first encounter with a trafficking victim, and that's how I got involved. Because after that case, then within a year of that case, I had my first domestic servitude case, and in 2004, I decided that there was a need to provide services to victims of human trafficking and to follow up on these type of cases. So I decided to I sacrificed my almost 10-year career with law enforcement and founded what we have today, which is the Florida Coalition Against Human Trafficking. Based on our work, based on the information that we're getting from ex-traffickers that have come forward, some of them talk about, trafficking anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 people a day. We're talking that in the United States there could be more than 2 million victims right now as we speak. Victims of human trafficking can be as young as a baby. It could be as young as a 5-6-year-old. It is said that 80% of the victims of human trafficking are women and children, and they're being used mostly for the sex trafficking, prostitution, pornography. The cases that we have uncovered here in the state of Florida, or particularly in the Southwest Florida area, the majority of the victims are young girls between the ages of 11 years old and 16 years old. We have had cases where we went to pick up a girl from a hospital because her baby had been ill with lung problems, and when we went to the hospital, we saw this baby, a 9-month-old baby that had no upper muscle development. All he could do was move his tongue and move his eyes. And when we took her back to a safe shelter, we realized while we were changing the baby's diaper, and we realized that the baby had been branded. The baby had the trafficker's initial carved to his back. Today, this baby is walking. This baby is moving like a very healthy baby. And we have found a doctor, a plastic surgeon, that once the baby is ready, he will do surgery. He will do plastic surgery to remove the scars, the branding from this baby. But these are the stories of these girls. What they go through, the torture. This girl basically was forced to work the labor during the day, but she was forced to probably have sex with many, many males during the night. These are girls, when you talk to them, we're not talking about 1, 2, 3 a night. We're talking about anywhere between 30, 40, 50 men that they have to have sex with. The key to defeating human trafficking in the United States, I think, first of all, we need to look into the source countries. We need to establish relationship with the source countries, with the governments, and try to bring the awareness and education to the source countries. But in reference to the United States, I think that the only way that we're going to defeat this is if we all unite, if we all come together. We need to bring a lot of awareness, a lot of education, not only to the community, but also to the faith-based agencies, to the churches, to law enforcement, because some law enforcement officers, basically, when you're talking about human trafficking or you're providing a training, they immediately look at you and say, well, why? You know, that's an immigration problem. Why should I get involved? Why should it affect me? But it's like we have one of the best prosecutors, you know, in the state of Florida, Doug Malloy, when he says that once they cross the border, once they're here in the United States, it is our problem. It is our problem to fight this. It is our problem to try to rescue victims of trafficking. I have a lot of faith. I think faith is the one that has kept me going. And every time I feel like a door is closing, 4 more are opening wider. And every time we rescue a child, and every time we can see how that child has now been able to sleep without having somebody, you know, threaten them, or to be able to go to sleep at night with their child without being forced to have sex with 30, 40, 50 men. A child that now is able to go to school and able to learn. And hopefully in next year we're going to have a child graduate from high school and pursuing, you know, college. That's what keeps Anna going. That's what keeps me and gives me the energy to continue, because if we can save one life, that's what matters. That's what it is all about.
Okay, and what's your name? Wing. Wing?
Yeah.
Don't touch me. Don't touch me there. Don't touch me. Don't touch me there. 'Cause I am barren. He is staring. We are trapped, caged like animals. I am small, it isn't fitting. I am screaming, but no one's listening. Don't touch me. Don't touch me there. I forgot what it feels like to feel safe. I forgot what it feels like to feel brave. A shattered soul never heals. This heart of flesh is turned to steel, and I've forgotten how to feel. Listen, little children, to the story of a girl who found the knight in shining armor. When he saved her from the dragon, he was strong and not afraid that there was more me. Don't touch me there.
God's angel intervenes and says, "Don't be afraid, Hagar, for God has heard the child cry."
In the U.S. government's report on human trafficking, Cambodia ranks as one of the worst countries in the world. Men, women, and children are all vulnerable to be subjugated for the purpose of sexual exploitation and forced labor. Pierre Tami established Hagar Shelter in Phnom Penh as a sanctuary for women and children. In 2004, the U.S. State Department selected Pierre and Hagar as one of its 6 heroes in the struggle against the global slave trade.
In the early 90s, I had the opportunity to visit Cambodia. I took a trip in the far northeast of the country where I was told there are the biggest problems in terms of malnutrition and suffering among women and children. And so I just happened to walk into a village in a rural area, and I heard a loud wailing, crying, coming from a little house, and I found a woman crying and weeping over her own 6 months child who just died of malaria. And a tragedy like that really hit my heart. So as I traveled back to Phnom Penh and back to Singapore, my mind was still filled with that image of the mother crying over her dead child. We were afflicted so that we could comfort others who are afflicted, and to bring that comfort that comes from God. And so I saw a purpose in it. I saw a reason of why this has happened to me and to my family. And so that was my calling, the turning point of our lives again, to move to Cambodia. And a few months later, my wife Simonetta and our 3 daughters moved to spend a summer in Phnom Penh to get a feel, to see, okay, what are we going to do now? We're in Cambodia, we have a passion, we have a desire, we have a motivation to reach out to mothers and their children, but the question was, what? Now, we took an interview, I researched about 100 women, tried to find out what was the reason, why were they in the street begging with their children. And one at a time, through the translator, we wrote down the reasons. And the reason number 1 was not so much poverty. The reason number 1 was violence. Violence in the home. They were beaten up, they were abused. Some of them were kicked out by their husbands to bring in a younger wife in. And they're not having any safety net in the rural area. They would just come to Phnom Penh with their children to seek to make a living. But as they came to the streets of Phnom Penh with this terrible situation, the violence, the abuse, the lack of food, the situation got so bad and worse that even kids would die. That basically speaks of tremendous human suffering, tremendous silent suffering of women and children who unnecessarily die and are neglected, are abandoned for whatever reasons, and don't have a hope and someone to care for them. So I saw, wow, I see the statistics. They're afraid, they're escaping, they're leaving the province because violence and abuse. And the story in the Bible is a Hagar, she was afraid, she flees, and God says, don't be afraid. And so I decided to open up a shelter for these Hagars who were fleeing with their children, and basically bringing the message of comfort of don't be afraid, we're going to take care of you. We recruited fantastic 10 Cambodian people who came back from the refugee camps and believed in the vision and shared together my values and believed in the story. These people are still with us today. They still form the key leadership of the organization, and they've been fantastic, tremendous people with hope, with a desire to rebuild their own country. And that's why I believe we succeed to work together in sharing the ideas, the vision, the passion, as well as from their side the desire to help their own people, the desire to care for women and children. As soon as we started to see women and young girls go into vocational training, we soon find out that their ability to reintegrate in society was very, very difficult, particularly because of the problem of stigmatization that prevent socially the full integration of these women and young girls. Also the state of the economy, the lack of jobs and the corruption make it very difficult for them to actually find a way to have a hope and a future. So we came out with the idea, why don't we start our own businesses, for-profit businesses that would be set up for the purpose to create jobs for these particular women and girls whom we seek to help, and so that we can see the full circle of from the street, from a brothel, all the way to a meaningful employment where they can get a reasonable wage and they see their children going to school, and so they will be totally off the cycle of poverty. We started off with Hagar crafts. My wife got involved in basically helping to produce very simple crafts as we taught women to sew. We founded some businesses in Singapore who started to buy some of our products. We then look at some other avenues. We'll look at the food industry. We started to teach women to cook and send them out with a little cart in the streets of Phnom Penh to sell breakfast and lunch. And then came the idea of the soya. As a family, we are used to drink soya back in Singapore, and so we looked around and no one was selling soya. So we started to make fresh soya milk, about 500 liters a day, and we set up an army of 24 women nicely dressed in uniform, beautiful red carts, and they would just roam around the streets of Phnom Penh selling fresh soya milk. So this is how the businesses were conceptualized at the very beginning. What we have today is basically a full commercial industrial forms of these businesses that were launched about 5 years ago. With Hagar Craft first, we fully commercialized it and became Hagar Design, that produce hand-woven silk products for home accessories and home furnishing and women bags and stuff. So we're now being able to sell in United States, in London, Switzerland, Australia, and in Japan. The soya milk is industrialized, commercialized to a level where we have modern machineries, 6,000 packs an hour. Or with the catering, we have the fantastic support of a man from Australia who has been doing catering for the last 30 years and took the small catering food business and developed it into a full commercial catering where we now prepare meals for 5-star hotel staff, garment factories, and even running the restaurant of the American Embassy. So he was able to develop this business, and in all we create more than 300 jobs. So it's very, very exciting to see this concept working fully here in Cambodia. As years went by, we could see how the social issues also changed here in Cambodia, particularly in the area of the nature of the problem of the children. More and more we were called to care for children that were victims of gang rape and sexual abuse, and particularly the problem of the trafficking. So 5 years ago we really needed to invest much more into this particular field. More and more children at a younger and younger age are being used for sex, are being trafficked here in Cambodia, and end up into brothels or being rented out at times even by their own parents for sexual purposes. And once the authorities would rescue these children, the question is, okay, where are they going to go? Certainly not with their parents if they were the one initially abusing them or basically facilitating their abuse. So we needed to see a modern a new approach to care for these kids, and aftercare program was designed. This is a program we opened up last year that cares for children between the age of 4 and 12 that are victims of severe sexual abuse, in particular those who come out from brothels and being victims of trafficking. Very, very touching program. You see these girls, I see my daughters. I could never imagine that any parents would allow their kids to go through this, and I really feel with compassion and see how these kids have been ruined and damaged. But at the same time, we are very, very happy that Hagar was able to respond to this plight and being able to care for these little ones. And the challenge, of course, is they are 4, they are 5, they are 6 years of age. We cannot tell them we care for you according to 3-year grants or 1-year grant, but we are committed to them all the way until they are 18, where they will be able to find a job and a way to reintegrate into society. But this particular problem is on the increase, and we need to expand it further and further to be able to care through this innovative model for these particular children. We are specialized on the Hagar, the individual mother and the child who have escaped and flees from war, displacement, violence, and abuse. And we want her, and our focus is her and her alone, to get there where she can have a future and a hope.
Rich in natural resources, Peru's economic growth has been hindered by political instability and government corruption. Thousands of children live on the streets of Lima, Peru. Whether alienated from or rejected by their families, these street kids are vulnerable to every kind of predator. Lucy Borja and her organization Generación almost single-handedly fight literally day and night to protect these children from violence and sexual exploitation.
Generación realized the complexity of street children at 2 specific moments. The first moment was when we were working with the children and youth that were in the juvenile halls, a jail that had very bad conditions for children. In that moment, we realized that the majority of the population in the juvenile hall were people that did not have a mother or a father that could speak up for them. 98% of the children that were in the juvenile halls were children living in the streets. When we started working with this population, we realized that with very little effort, we could improve their lives.
Era finales de la década del 80.
It was at the end of the 80s when we were already working with a small group of children that were doing their transition from street children to working children, that the public places such as San Martin Square, Plaza Grau Square, Parque Canape, saw an increase in the population of street children. These were children that were escaping from the violence in their cities, which originated from the internal armed conflict that our country was experiencing. This increase was getting larger day by day. At the same time, there was occurring an attempt against the children's lives. There were death squads that went to the public places in the afternoon and shot the children and youth that lived in the streets. The youth and children living in the streets knew that we were helping a small group of children to go ahead with their lives. This group of children asked for help, and we did not have any other choice than to help them. When we decided to host the children, 600 children arrived in our office. When we asked for help from the institutions of the state, they responded with repression against our organization. At that moment, we were in the middle of an institutional crisis. We had a group of workers that were affected by these circumstances. The children slept on, under and inside their desks. Their papers, where they did their writing, ended up in the bathroom when there was not enough toilet paper. Having 600 children in the house was not easy, so the workers gave me an ultimatum: the children or the work. Generación said the children because we wanted to help them find an alternative way of life. This was not easy, because all sectors of society turned against us.
Their building was eventually closed by the government of Peru.
This was the second moment for Generación to discover that there was a big group of kids that came from rural cities that were escaping from the internal war that the country was living through. There are a lot of children that decide to live in the streets mainly because of problems with their families. Ill treatment and violence inside the family are some of the reasons they leave. A child might also leave home because the family does not function well, or because the stepfather does not want to offer support. Then the child meets other children in the street that are looking for possibilities to find a different life. However, society immediately stigmatizes these children and persecutes them.
This young woman is one of the street kids that Lucy has tried to help.
When I was 6 years old, I left home because my stepfather put a whole light bulb on my leg. And so I escaped to live in Lima, downtown, sniffing glue. The night is the hardest time for a child that lives in the streets because they have to face the violence that exists there. They have to confront the people that try to rape and exploit them. And they have to escape from the people that try to put them in jail. There are people with basic instincts, pedophiles that search for street children because they think that nobody will defend them. And they are not completely wrong. In our experiences, the police authorities usually do not defend the street children. Rather, they defend the exploiters. There is sadly a sexual commerce in our country where people try to convince young boys and girls to get involved in this underworld. There are a lot of people that make money exploiting children, and this is a system that works like a mafia. There are motels that do not care if a child goes inside the place, and these places may even have a policeman guarding the door. Police protect the clients, and we currently don't have a reliable authority where we can go and report these pedophiles. We organize a mass every May 1st, Labor's Day, to honor the street children that have died. This past May 1st, the children from Generación organized a religious ceremony to honor the street children that have died. Children have died due to tuberculosis or AIDS, or in an accident, or they were killed. The struggle to survive is hard. The average lifespan of a street kid is 26 years. Those pictures are the pictures of every child that has died, and the photos are carried by people that were their friends. They are kids that knew them very well.
Generación now has several sites in Lima and beyond, where they provide shelter, food, and educational resources to young people.
The goals of a child who comes to Generación are many. They can be human beings that do good, can have an entrepreneurial spirit, can build their own life, can be happy, can take care of their families, and have dignity, pride, moral and civic values that allow them to be good citizens. They want to make use of their citizenship to participate in the construction of their own destiny. I pray to God for the future that He would send me a job as a gardener or anything. I want to work and be a good example for my children.
Esa es la meta.
The goal is that they can transform all the negative energy that they have received during their lives and become good human beings.
For more than 20 years, East Africa has been the center of a humanitarian crisis. Rebel armies have been in the business of enslaving children who can be as young as 7. They are abducted to act as beasts of burden, sex slaves, and even as soldiers. An estimated 40,000 young ones have been captured. In Uganda, the primary group responsible for these atrocities is the LRA, a guerrilla militia.
So as my mother was taking them around, they found an old man. So when they saw the old man, they left my mother and took the old man. And as they walked some more distance, they found my brother and the friend, and they were also taken.
James, a rescued 13-year-old child soldier, grieves all the killing he has witnessed. Charles, a freed 14-year-old, still has nightmares about the 2 men he was forced to beat to death. Josephine was made to become a rebel leader's wife at the age of 11.
She tried to refuse, that's why she was beaten.
Catherine was treated cruelly by her abductors.
It was a saucepan picked right from fire. I just put it plainly on my bare head, then even the hot soup from the saucepan spilled on my back and burned me terribly.
No longer going to do those things that we have been to.
Florence LaCour works at World Vision's Children of War Center in Gulu, Uganda.
When I'm talking to a child, and the child was telling me how they are tortured when you try to escape, sometimes I become blank, because I had never imagined that a human being could treat one like that.
Since its founding by World Vision in 1995, the Children of War Rehabilitation Program has helped more than 14,500 former child soldiers. When rescued child soldiers arrive, they are welcomed with open arms and joyous singing.
This is lovely. With birds.
Florence's own daughter was abducted by the guerrillas from a private school in northern Uganda in 1996.
But as she said, every time you hear the bombing, because we could hear the bombing and the gunshots all the time, and I would think, maybe they are bombing her, maybe they're shooting her. Actually, it's difficult to know unless you hear it from the children, to know what they go through. Because to me, it was like any other person, that children are taken into captivity, maybe they're trained to hold a gun and to fight. But there are so many things that happened, like beating all the time, walking through the forest, walking through the thick bushes where there's no road. I mean, mobilizing the children to kill one another when they try to escape, and seeing people die, and then there's no going back, there's no, you are not on your own, you are just like a slave, you are used, being used in any way they want. So I said, God, maybe you bring her in your own time, but bring her, don't let her die in the bush. That's how I ended up counseling, especially the mothers, because the mothers have stayed more than the other children. Maybe they were abducted at a tender age and they take a long time in the bush, they suffer more.
After almost 9 years, Florence was reunited with her daughter Angela.
I wanted to see my mother, and just because they said she's dead, I wanted to see if it was true. She was alive. That's all. And the good thing, I saw her, she was standing, and then some of my cousins, my sisters, so I was happy.
Many of the rescued slaves need tangible signs that their horrible past is behind them. Burning their old clothing is one way to do that.
So we want to burn them as a symbol that we no longer want to do those things that we have been doing, we have been forced to do when we are in captivity.
If there was one thing I could change, would just be to tell God to forgive us because we are suffering innocently. I would tell God to let the rebels come back from the bush so that the sufferings can stop.
The UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs has called the situation in Uganda a moral outrage. However, the world has done little to alleviate the crisis. Florence LaCour and other members of the World Vision staff work hard to address the challenges of rehabilitating the children brought to them. The children of Uganda, like all children, deserve a future and a hope for a better world. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is engraved on the wall of his memorial. In that speech, he praises the brave men who gave the last full measure of their devotion to the cause, and he called upon the living to increase their commitment in their honor, so that those heroic dead shall not have died in vain. One man who has taken Lincoln's challenge to heart is Gary Haugen, founder of International Justice Mission, which is located in Washington, D.C. International Justice Mission is a human rights agency that works to rescue victims of violence, oppression, sexual exploitation, and slavery from around the world.
And I was a lawyer at the Department of Justice. I loved doing my job. I loved promoting civil rights here in the United States, and I think someone should police the police, and so I got to do that here in the United States. But I also knew that there are people overseas who just faced incredibly brutal oppression, but they had nowhere to turn to for help. And specifically, I had friends who were working overseas with organizations that were serving the poor, and they would just tell me stories of horrific cases of abuse and oppression, and I could hear from them their sense of helplessness. What do I do? And so there were these stories from my own experience and from experience of friends where the poor seemed to be suffering because they didn't have food or housing or medicine, but they clearly were suffering because of the intentional abuse and oppression of other people, because of violence. And the law is supposed to respond to violence, and what these people had was simply no access to law that would bring to bear justice on their behalf. The darkest thing I have seen, perhaps, is sort of the death in the eyes of girls who've been sold into a brothel and who are just raped day after day, and to see sort of the death in their eyes, it's almost paralyzing and overwhelming. But what I saw was that if you stay committed to them, if you simply say, okay, I may not be able to rescue everybody, but what about this girl that I know? This girl named Juan, or this girl named Joy T. I mean, they all have names. And if you simply ask, what would it take to get her out of that situation and to bring justice to the man who's abusing her in this way? And the first thing we wanted to do is just demonstrate that it was possible to actually do something about these problems. Because it seemed to be a category of problem that people had sort of written off as just impossible. Yes, we can feed the poor, yes, we can house them, yes, we can give them medicine, but if they're being beaten up by the bad guys and abused, gosh, don't know what we could do. And so what we needed to do first was to demonstrate, no, you can actually respond to these kinds of cases. You can actually rescue them out of that abuse, and you can actually bring the perpetrators to justice. So Cambodia is a pretty vivid example for me. This little town of Svay Pak outside Phnom Penh, where when we first went there, there was just hundreds of children on open sale to foreign pedophiles and sex tourists. And any man could just walk into that circumstance down the main road. You'd immediately be ushered into a brothel. And especially if you made it known that you liked young girls, you'd just be presented with scores of little girls that could be raped, that could be just horrifically abused in sexually traumatic ways for just a few dollars. And this was just an open festival of sexual assault.
Okay.
This one you can boom boom and fun.
Really?
And boom boom and yum yum, yes.
Even though she's just 12?
Yes.
And these two? What's your name? Just Yum Yum. She's 12 and she is?
13 years old.
13?
Yeah.
13 and 12. 10? 10 years. And this one? 8? And you're 8-year-old? And you can do boom boom? Boom boom is okay? It's okay? Really? How much you charge for Yum Yum? One girl?
Okay, 30.
30?
Yeah.
30 is okay?
Yeah.
One girl? And what about everything? Boom boom? Okay. Alright. 10? Gee. And how old is she? 10. And what can they do?
Nhâm nhâm massage.
Ask her what you can do. Yum yum. And good? You're good? Yeah, really? What about this one? Chang. Chang? Chang. Can you do yum yum? You can do? And are you good?
There's huge, tragic problems in the world. I have no idea how you would solve them. But massive open sex trafficking is not one of those problems. That's actually something you can do something about. And it's been changed in different places around the world. We had a horrific history of it here in the United States. It still goes on at some level, but it used to be just massive and pervasive in our large cities. And where there is the decision on the part of political will that we were going to address it and then provide law enforcement with the tools to meet the problem, you can eliminate the vast majority of this abuse. Because what we found was that most of it was just very soft crime. It was crime of opportunity. They would do it on a large scale because they could. And you're always going to have hard crime that still goes underground and continues at a certain level, but this massive, open, horrific abuse of children sexually doesn't have to continue and take place. And where people of goodwill provide political will and capacity building, it will end. But what we did find, I think, was that most of the abuse is actually not driven by the overwhelming power of the perpetrators. It's driven by the utter vulnerability of the victims. And that if they are simply given an advocate, many times if you stay committed, you can actually bring justice. But it's always a question of commitment. Because the bad guys are totally committed to what they're doing. And especially the costs of accountability are very, very high and serious to them. And so they are going to fight hard the closer you get to that goal line. And you have to be extremely committed to this. And you have to be as committed to those victims and to their welfare as the bad guys are. Because they are committed to abusing those victims and profiting from it. And what the poor don't get is the benefit of law enforcement. So in all these countries that we go to, we don't have to bring some outside moral impulse that is against sex trafficking or slavery. It's against the law inside these countries. What the poor have not been getting is law enforcement, which connects then to why it is that you find all these foreign sex tourists and pedophiles coming to these countries to purchase sex from those who are trading with kids. They come there because they think they won't get caught.
In newspaper, I read about police,
no problem. You know the one, you can stay, come here, you know, they leave with me, the one police come, okay, no problem. I give money, police, we go, no problem.
You give money to police?
Yeah, no problem, police.
Okay, can I meet police here, give $100?
Yeah.
Oh, hello. Sumritsa.
Vô đây chưa?
No problem? You will guarantee safety? Oh, okay. So I will give him 20 now, and just as a deposit, 20?
So many people have abandoned the public justice systems that they now don't even know where they are specifically broken or how to make them work. And yet the poor are only going to ever have access to justice through a public justice system. Because this is all that is needed in the world, is a credible threat and deterrent that you will go to jail for a very long time if you do this. And that is something that we can actually accomplish.
Bus, 25-passenger bus of Cambodian police and a minibus of Cambodian police will depart Bravo, and they will in fact arrive at Alpha. So you have bus number 2 and bus number 3 arrive at Alpha. The Cambodian police will overwhelm the building, Alpha, that we're in, take protective custody of the children, and they will arrest the suspects that we have inside this area. Police officers coming behind, or some indication that the police are involved, that there's a problem, some indication of a problem. So the surprise and the ruse is our best defense.
And so what we do now, when we infiltrate these places of commercial sex, we're able to find those foreign pedophiles and sex tourists and identify them, and then provide that information to their governments back home. And now, because of advocating for changes of laws in those countries, they are able to be prosecuted back home. And it doesn't take very many of these successful prosecutions, which we've started to see now, before these rather cowardly predators get it figured out that I'm going to get in trouble for doing this. In fact, in Svay Pak, this place where there was horrific open sale of children and where the foreign sex tourists and pedophiles used to come to prey upon these young kids, after people started to be sent to jail, we could monitor their websites where they would say, the party's over in Svay Pak. Don't come here anymore. You will get arrested. So what IJM has had to do is train advocates who will work that system so relentlessly that they make it actually work for the poor, they find where it's broken, and then we begin to actually repair it by training local authorities, police, courts, and resourcing them so they can actually render justice for the poor who depend upon them. What people need to know today is that there's actually more people in slavery in the world today than were extracted from Africa during 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade. Most of us just don't know that. And so that's where the fight against slavery actually begins, is just with ordinary people willing to actually understand it and to talk about it. Change only happens when we're willing to talk about sometimes the unpleasant things. 1 million children taken into forced prostitution new every year around the world. That's difficult to think about, hard to talk about, but that's where it begins for the ordinary person.
What kind of a world do we have when no one gets in trouble for sex trafficking? A world where sex traffickers have nothing to fear and children have everything to fear.
You know, it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn who said that there were really two standards by which we judge events in the world, whether they are near or whether they are far. And that even the most catastrophic human suffering can become what he called a tolerable disaster of bearable proportions if it's far enough away.
So it's becoming aware. It's teaching and making others aware. It's providing advocacy for them. It's making sure that the authorities who are engaging policy around the world make it a priority. And that means all of us matter. We actually have an opportunity to change things. And the idea that there's nothing that we can do, this I've seen is just completely false. And that's the number one challenge, is to get over the idea that there's nothing we can do. Because I've seen people's lives actually change by very common people simply doing what they can do. That actually is what makes a difference in the world.
Join the fight. Abolish. Liberate. Emancipate.
And I could hear your voice from the room. You would whisper sometimes that you'd see me soon. I remember being born in a white room. I remember your eyes. I remember you. And I can feel your heartbeat. It's the mind. It's the subtle things that tie the bonds. I remember being poor, being used. I remember your lies, and I remember you. Now that hope's all gone, my dreams are dead, and the memories of you slipped away from my head. And I hold my baby sister laid in our bed, and I tell her sometimes that I'd always be there. Now I'm lost and tired, and I hurt like hell. Only devils and shadows living in this jail. And no, I'm not for sale. And no, I'm not for sale. I can see your smile, smell your hair. You would work all day, but I didn't care. I remember feeling safe next to you. I remember your sad eyes. I remember you. My innocence gone, and you've stolen my youth. The promise of tomorrow is gone like you. I remember feeling whole, feeling true. I remember your lies, and I remember you. Now that hope's all gone, and my dreams are dead, and the memories of you slipped away from my head. And I hold my baby sister laid in our bed, and I tell her sometimes that I'd always be there. Now I'm lost and tired, and I hurt like hell. Only devils and shadows living in this jail. And no, I'm not for sale. I said no, I'm not for sale. One time I will hold up my head, and in no time I will see you again. This is my line, and where I stand, open your eyes and reach out your hands. Oh, one time I will hold up my head. This is a crime, and it's done by a man. Jacob's ladder is where I stand, but I'm climbing, trying to see you again. Now that hope's all gone, and my dreams are dead, and the memories of you slipped away from my head. And I hold my baby sister laid in our bed, and I tell her sometimes that I'd always be there. Now I'm lost and tired, and I hurt like hell. Only devils and shadows living in this jail. And no, I'm not for sale. I said no, I'm not for sale. One time I will hold up my head, and in no time I will see you again. This is my line, and where I stand, open your eyes and reach out your hands. Oh, one time I will hold up my head. This is a crime, and it's done by man. Jacob's ladder is where I stand, but I'm climbing, trying to see you again.
Slavery, the trafficking in human beings. haven't we seen the last of human bondage? After more than 10 years of global efforts to combat slavery, the heartbreaking reality is that this massive multi-billion-dollar criminal activity continues to grow. Ever-increasing numbers of men, women, and children are kidnapped and forced against their will into a factory, home, a field, a brothel, or a war zone. More than 27 million people are slaves today. Over 21 million are women and children. At least 2 million of these victims are in the United States. In spite of these tragic figures, there are modern-day abolitionists who battle human trafficking. This film will tell the story of 5 such heroes across the globe, from the Far East to even here in the shadow of our country's capital. They work to rescue victims and to prosecute the traffickers. Not for sale. 2. Join the fight. Cambodia has had more than 30 years of war. The Vietnam War was followed by the violent Khmer Rouge takeover of the country. Nearly 2 million Cambodians died by execution, forced labor, or starvation. Then Vietnam invaded. Finally, they were occupied by United Nations troops, all of which has left its infrastructure in ruins and its population devastated by AIDS. It has become a land of widows and orphans who are often forced into prostitution or slave-like labor in factories. In the little more than 10 years that Ted and Sue Olbrich have been in Cambodia, they have established more than 3,000 churches and founded more than 100 church orphan homes.
One of the biggest problems in Cambodia is trafficking of young girls that come in to work at the garment factories. They're mainly uneducated country girls with little prospect for anything in life other than hopefully to find a husband, and if they don't have money, that's difficult. And so they get jobs in the garment factories, and of course they're preyed upon by the pimps and those that would like to get them to enter the sex trade.
In the U.S., men, women, and children are vulnerable to every type of trafficking. While government and law enforcement efforts have increased prosecution against the trafficking of foreigners, U.S. women and children are particularly at risk from traffickers due to the lack of any coordinated efforts to protect them. Catherine Chon is co-founder of the Polaris Project, dedicated to combating modern slavery. Polaris is one of the largest anti-trafficking organizations in the United States.
Traffickers aren't just victimizing foreign nationals and bringing them across borders, but trafficking in most countries, including here in the United States, victimizes its own citizens and residents. It's the internal trafficking that's the greater problem. When I first learned about that, I was shocked again, because it's one thing to hear about a mother in Cambodia living in a rural village having to make ends meet and selling her daughter to a neighbor or someone else who was offering a job. But when we first learned about American children being sold by their mothers, we had one client who was sold 2 days before her 14th birthday by her mother to a sex trafficker. It again reminded us that this world is very small, that traffickers, they don't discriminate according to age, ethnicity, culture, sometimes even gender. Traffickers are just looking to make profit off of human beings.
Diana was just a young, happy-go-lucky girl before this all happened to her. And she died at 20. Just because she fell for somebody and he got into her head. That's basically it. He was known as the most successful pimp in Portland at that time, and at that time he was her age at 20.
Pimps and traffickers target people, they target children, they target women in general, for every background.
There has never been the demand that there is now for young girls and women, trafficked young girls and women.
All of this that happened in a very short period of time could have killed me, and almost did in a lot of ways. I had no self-esteem, I had no worth. I felt like the only thing that I could do was something that made me feel horrible about myself. The only thing I could do to have a place to sleep and to survive was to have sex with men. And I was still a baby.
Thailand is recognized worldwide as a site for sex tourism. Girls from all over the globe are trafficked into the country. While some efforts have been made by authorities against traffickers, the recent government turmoil has limited any significant progress. Annie Dieselberg co-founded Nightlight International in 2006 to help combat the complex issues surrounding trafficking and the sexual exploitation of women and children in Thailand.
Women from Thailand are literally, they are sent all over the world into the sex trade. A lot of them go from here to LA, a lot of them go to Germany, a lot of them go to places like Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong, all over the world. But Thailand is also strangely a place that brings in women from all over the world for the sex industry. And this area is one of the most international sex trade areas in Thailand. And on any given night, we can talk to women and children from as many as 14, 15 different countries. 2 of the streetwalkers in the last 3 to 4 months have been murdered by their clients. And as one streetwalker said to us recently, I asked her, I said, are you afraid here on the street? Because 2 women from this street have been killed in the last few months. And she said, I want to die. If I die and I go to hell, it'll be better than this.
While sex trafficking is a horrendous problem everywhere in the world, authorities have found that the most common form of trafficking in the United States is men, women, and even children forced into domestic servitude or debt bondage in the agricultural, manufacturing, or service industries. Identification and protection of these victims is extremely difficult.
She told me, dogs have more rights than you in this country. You are here illegally and nobody can trust you. If you go to the police, they might put you in jail because you have no papers. You are here illegally. And she told me many times, and if you do something, I will call to the INS and they send you back, and not only send you back, they might put you in jail.
International Justice Mission is headquartered in Washington, D.C., founded by former Department of Justice lawyer Gary Haugen. It is a human rights agency with more than 14 field offices around the globe. It was established in 1997 to rescue the victims of modern slavery and to ensure that the traffickers are prosecuted.
Why are all these victims of sex trafficking and slavery poor? I mean, there must be this connection between the slavery that they're in and the sex trafficking and poverty. This must be a problem of poverty. And I think it really is, but it's a problem of poverty that's different than I thought. The problem with being poor is not necessarily that you don't have money. The problem is that you don't get law enforcement. That is to say, you don't get basic protection in your person or in your property. So all of these victims that we've seen rescued from rock quarries as slaves, or from brick kilns, or rescued from brothels, yes, they had problems because they were poor. And so that made them more willing to believe some of the lies that the sex traffickers and slave traders would tell them, that would entice them away from their places of protection like their village or their home. But once they get there, they don't learn the truth, and then they have the opportunity to say, oh, well, I didn't know that I was going to be a slave. I didn't know I was going to be in a brothel. I'm going to leave now. You know, the thing that keeps them there is violence.
Many times she comes, and I don't know how do you say this, do this? Pinch. Hit me in my body, in my back.
After 2 years trying to figure out how my beautiful daughter could get involved in this. And I sat in these courtrooms, and the first girl testified. Then I went up and saw the other girl, and I sat there and tears streamed down my face, and I went, oh my God, that's what my daughter went through. And it finally clicked that those emotions, why she was so dead, why you couldn't get emotions out of her, it was gone. Her emotions were Diana was emotionally dead before she was murdered. Truly emotionally dead before she was murdered. So I saw a daughter that in the past had sparkle to her eyes, that she had joy in her eyes. And when I would approach her on certain things, that joy, that sparkle was completely gone. It was like you were looking at a blank face. Her face was completely blank.
I see a streetwalker. She walking down the street. She gonna be sold again, so her kids can eat.
Ana Rodriguez has been recognized both nationally and internationally for her work with victims of human trafficking. She established the Florida Coalition Against Human Trafficking to help local law enforcement and federal authorities identify and assist modern victims of slavery. Florida Coalition has offices throughout Florida to help rescue and restore these victims.
Based on our work, based on the information that we're getting from ex-traffickers that have come forward, some of them talk about, trafficking anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 people a day. We're talking that in the United States there could be more than 2 million victims right now as we speak. Victims of human trafficking can be as young as a baby. It could be as young as a 5-6-year-old. It is said that 80% of the victims of human trafficking are women and children, and they're being used mostly for the sex trafficking, prostitution, pornography. The cases that we have uncovered here in the state of Florida, or particularly in the Southwest Florida area, the majority of the victims are young girls between the ages of 11 years old and 16 years old. We have had cases where we went to pick up a girl from a hospital because her baby had been ill with lung problems. And when we went to the hospital, we saw this baby, a 9-month-old baby that had no upper muscle development. All he could do was move his tongue and move his eyes. And when we took her back to a safe shelter, we realized while we were changing the baby's diaper, and we realized that the baby had been branded. The baby had the trafficker's initial carved to his back. Today, this baby is walking. This baby is moving like a very healthy baby. And we have found a doctor, a plastic surgeon, that once the baby is ready, he will do surgery. He will do plastic surgery to remove the scars, the branding from this baby. But these are the stories of these girls. What they go through, the torture. This girl basically was forced to work the labor during the day, but she was forced to probably have sex with many, many males during the night. These are girls, when you talk to them, we're not talking about 1, 2, 3 a night. We're talking about anywhere between 30, 40, 50 men that they have to have sex with.
As a parent, you need to be able to, if you can't say goodbye, you need to be able to see them, or touch a piece of hair, or
see a hand, but you don't want to get your child back in a body bag.
If I was killed, I would have been labeled Jane Doe and buried in a lot, you know, for indigents, and there would be a lot of people really glad that I was off of their street corners, you know, and they would never in their wildest dreams think that I could be the leader that I am. Or that I could create an organization like SAGE and I could change the way people look at individuals like myself, trafficked women and girls.
Han is our #1 contractor. If you look at our 106 orphan homes around the country, he's probably built over half of them. He's built most of the buildings here at the training center. And his most recent accomplishment is behind us. It's the woman's dorm for the garment factory workers. They need safe places to live. They don't have security for their belongings. They don't have safe places to be free from those that would prey upon them. And a lot of them have come to the church and come to know Jesus Christ. And so we have facilities here now for 480 of them to come and live in safety and hopefully get some decent food and a safe place to live at night. And not only that, each room will house 10 young women, and each room is a cell group. And so they'll have their daily devotions, and in addition to their normal church involvement, and their main function is to go and evangelize the other girls in their factories.
Is prostitution a victimless crime? Well, I think the answer to that will have to be, of course it's not a victimless crime. Of course they're the victims. And we see things we go by things according to what we see. We see a woman out on the street and we just automatically assume that she chose to be out there and she's happy and life is great. We don't really take a deeper look. We don't even pay attention to the other men around who are standing outside there with her. It is not a victimless crime because she's getting abused and raped every single day of her life. So how can that be victimless?
Polaris Project has a very comprehensive approach to how we combat human trafficking because we think that by taking a holistic approach we'll be the most effective. So part of our work is helping victims directly, addressing the question of how can we change individual lives today, and that's where our victim identification and social service work comes in. For every victim we're helping, there are hundreds of thousands out there we're not helping. So how can we work with partners to change laws at the federal level, at the state level, so that the systems are changing for the long term to protect future victims?
I knew that something had to be done. I knew that there was injustice. I knew that the majority of these women did not want to do what they were doing, and given an opportunity, they would choose otherwise. And it's one thing to stand outside of a bar, to walk past it, and to see women dressed in seductive clothing, and to see them smile at a man walking by and say, "Hey, I love you, short time," and think that, you know, they're okay with what they're doing. But it's another thing to be sitting with them at the bar, and after they call out to a foreigner, they turn around and they have tears in their eyes, and they say, "I never wanted to do this. I cried every night the first month that I was here, but I have to send money home, and I'd rather be doing anything else." We came together and decided that we would form a new organization called Nightlight, which would work to reach women in prostitution and those who are trafficked or at risk of trafficking in the Nana-Sukumwe area. And there was one young woman who was very noticeable, so I called her over to talk to her, and she was 22. She had her first child when she was 13. She had 2 children. She'd only had a 2nd grade education, and she'd been working only 4 days. She didn't want to work there, she didn't want to continue. And so there I was with the situation. And when you hear something like that, I mean, I don't know how you can walk away and not do something. And so I paid the bar fee, I paid the 500 baht, and took her out of the bar, and that's the fee for one night, where we had nothing, really. But I had been practicing making jewelry and thought that would be a perfect job for women coming out of prostitution.
Yesterday I give Han $10, so today I give you $10 because many girl. So, can you explain this is a deposit?
From the very beginning, IJM had 4 outcomes that it was seeking in all of its cases. First of all, victim rescue. Because if you were in that situation, if I was in that situation, in slavery or locked in a brothel, we'd want someone to get us out. Secondly was perpetrator accountability. The bad guys need to be brought to justice. The third goal was always aftercare for these victims, because we recognize that it's not just a matter of getting them out, they need a future, and that's going to take some work. The fourth goal was structural prevention. You've been doing a lot of these cases, so how do you now prevent it from happening over and over again?
The key to defeating human trafficking in the United States, I think, first of all, we need to look into the source countries. We need to establish relationship with the source countries, with the governments, and try to bring the awareness and education to the source countries. But in reference to the United States, I think that the only way that we're going to defeat this is if we all unite, if we all come together. We need to bring a lot of awareness, a lot of education, not only to the community, but also to the faith-based agencies, to the churches, to law enforcement, because some law enforcement officers, basically, when you're talking about human trafficking or you're providing a training, they immediately look at you and say, well, why? You know, that's an immigration problem. Why should I get involved? Why should it affect me? Once they cross the border, once they're here in the United States, it is our problem. It is our problem to fight this. It is a problem to try to rescue victims of trafficking.
I had to teach, and I still do, have to teach neighborhood groups how to talk about the men, and individuals how to talk about the men. They don't realize that there's even men involved in this, you know, and the fact that the $32 billion industry of trafficking in women and girls is funded $1 at a time by men who have decided to use their money to buy a human being. So everybody wants to look at the women, or they have now wanted to look at the traffickers. You know, that's a huge, huge industry and incredibly well-funded industry. And to try to take that down is a very big enterprise. But if you go after the men, if you go after the demand and make it where it's not worth it for them to buy a human being anymore, you can really make a dent in trafficking.
The anti-trafficking movement in the United States and globally to be successful needs everyone to do their part. We receive over 100 applications for each of our fellowship sessions, where people from across the country, around the world, apply to volunteer for us for 3 to 4 months to work at the front lines of the anti-trafficking movement. Similar to our other chapters in offices in Seattle, Rhode Island, Boston, Los Angeles, Denver, New Jersey, All of those local efforts started up by community members who participated in our fellowship program, who volunteered with us, and brought together and unified others with a similar passion and just combined people's skills to the point where we have volunteer chapters training law enforcement, working with state legislators, introducing bills, passing bills.
We established Nightlight Design Company Limited as a registered Thai business company. And so the women come in Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and they make jewelry. And in the process of making jewelry, which is a job that gives them dignity, aside from that, we offer English classes, spiritual formation classes to the women, other life skills training, whether it's cooking, parenting, budgeting, health issues. We work with the women for holistic transformation, to help them to be able to move forward in their life with something dignity. And it does make a difference. One young woman, the one who I had known for 6 years previously, when she started making the jewelry, she was so proud of what she was making. And she wanted a picture taken with everything that she made. And she said to me one day, you know, I used to always walk with my head down because I was so ashamed of who I was and what I did. But now I catch myself walking with my head high because I'm really proud of what I'm doing.
I have a lot of faith. I think faith is the one that has kept me going. And every time I feel like a door is closing, 4 more are opening wider. And every time we rescue a child, and every time we can see how that child has now been able to sleep without having somebody, you know, threaten them, or to be able to go to sleep at night with their child without being forced to have sex with 30, 40, 50 men. That's what makes Anna going. That's what keeps me and gives me the energy to continue, because if we can save one life, that's what it matters.
No matter what physical damage has been done to my body, I feel like spiritually I can mend the things that have happened and come out of this hole. And this process of sharing my story is a way to make something positive out of something very negative. And that's a healing process. And when I go out and I share and I move people and I get them to feel and I get them to recognize the potential in other children that have gone through this, then I think I give hope, and that helps me.
You know, it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn who said that there were really 2 standards by which we judge events in the world, whether they are near or whether they are far. And that even the most catastrophic human suffering can become what he called a tolerable disaster of bearable proportions if it's far enough away.
Change only happens when we're willing to talk about sometimes the unpleasant things. 1 million children taken into forced prostitution new every year around the world. That's difficult to think about, hard to talk about, but that's where it begins for the ordinary person, is simply let's talk about this.
What kind of a world do we have when no one gets in trouble for sex trafficking? A world where sex traffickers have nothing to fear and children have everything to fear.
So it's becoming aware. It's teaching and making others aware. It's providing advocacy for them. It's making sure that the authorities who are engaging policy around the world make it a priority. And that means all of us matter. We actually have an opportunity to change things. And the idea that there's nothing that we can do, this I've seen is just completely false. And that's the number 1 challenge, is to get over the idea that there's nothing we can do. Because I've seen people's lives actually change by very common people simply doing what they can do. That actually is what makes a difference in the world.
To join the fight against human trafficking, go to notforsalefilm.com.